Hello out there, and today guys I'm going to be doing a comparison review between the Brous blade Specter and the Massdrop Gent. And I wanted to talk about these two knives next to each other because obviously they do look very similar. You know, just right off the bat you can see that the blade shapes are pretty similar. The applications for these two knives are going to be almost exactly the same too. Both very good Gent folders, both pretty light, both still good all-purpose EDCs as well. But there are a lot of differences, a lot of differences when it comes to the materials used, the build structure, and then most importantly, the price point. And for that reason, I'm actually going to start this video with my recommendation and my preference. And I can tell you guys 100% that if I have these two knives in hand, the one that I prefer is definitely going to be the Specter. But when it comes to materials and also the action and the price point, the Gent on paper certainly has the advantage, and the Gent runs $80 to $85, while the Specter is in the $155 range, I think, for the cheapest version of it, and that's this one. There are, some more expensive ones that are like blacked out or acid stone washed, but just this satin in black is $155, I think. So almost twice the price for materials that are, going to be less quality. For a lot of people right there, that should end the video, right? But for me, it just creates, I guess, a really interesting dynamic when you look at these two next to each other, when you have a knife that has better materials on one side and a better price point, but still, at the end of the day, I prefer this. Maybe not at the price point, but we'll get back to that. Alright guys, so let's just get into it. We'll talk about both knives, even if you're not too worried about comparing one versus the other. You get enough information here to make your mind up about both of them. Alright, and so starting with our overall sizes and our cutting edges, you can see pretty similar here, but talking about the Gent first, we have about a looks like 2.75, almost 2.66 inch cutting edge, a little bit cut off because of that choil, but exactly 3 inches of cutting edge when we're looking at the Specter. All right, but the blade steels is where we have our first big difference. Looking at the Gent here, this is S35VN. This is a flat ground blade, really attractive, good utility shape. Also just a really nice classy Gents look too. The only markings on the blade, if we're talking about just the actual design on the blade, is the Massdrop logo here, and then you also have the blade steel and you have the serial number. All right, but other than that, it's pretty bare. Personally, I like seeing all that information on the blade, so it doesn't bother me at all. But still very minimalist when it comes to that. Excellent blade shape, no jimping, but just the forward choil. What you lack in jimping, the forward choil, I think, gives you a little bit extra comfort and a little bit more versatility when you get the knife in hand, which we'll get back to in a minute. And S35VN is, for a lot of people, their favorite steel. So can't really complain about that. Now, when we're looking at the Brous, we do have a hollow grind on this D2 blade, and this blade is completely sterile. So actually, while we're looking at it, the only markings on this entire knife are the Brous Blades logo and lettering right here on the clip. And then on the bottom right here, you can see the 93 out of 500 just to mark what serial number it is. So really nothing going on. A lot of decisions made in the design of this knife to keep it really classy and streamlined and as good a Gents piece as you possibly could. Now this one does have a little bit of jimping, and actually more than a little bit. Take a look. The jimping here is really good. Let's see it from the side and try to see how it's cut out. It really does grab the thumb nicely. There's a lot of it. So while you don't have the forward choil that maybe the Gent has, you still do have the ability to get that extra good purchase for some more detail work if you need that. Really great, attractive blades on both of these though. Now let's get these back in focus and bring a couple other knives in just for a quick size comparison. You can see when we're looking at the overall length of the knife that just slightly, by less than half of an inch, the Brous blade Specter is a little bit longer. And here are a couple other knives that we can bring in just to give you a little bit of a comparison. Here's the CRKT Squid. So even though these are, both going to be considered gent folders, they're not these small little mini knives. They do stack up pretty well in size to the mini Griptilian right here. And then finally, the Para 3 is a really good size comparison as well. These both seem a little bit more compact, though, than the Para 3, which, has dimensions that go up and down. These are a little bit more, confined and compact, and that's definitely a good thing. Now, as we continue to talk about the knives and we just look at the rest of the materials and the locking mechanisms, both of these knives, even though it doesn't look like it, both of these are frame locks. All right, the materials are very different. We have a stainless steel frame lock on the Specter right here and a titanium frame lock on the Massdrop Gent. Now, it does seem as though this might be a liner lock because of the overlays right here, the G10, but as Slicey Dicey said in his video, this is actually a frame lock. You can take these G10 scales off and actually still have a perfectly functional knife. And later on in this video, I will be disassembling these two knives and showing you these two knives completely apart. And when I put them back together, I'll show that. I'll demonstrate that this knife works just fine without the scales. The scales are really sort of just for show. But yeah, a good titanium frame lock, which makes it a nice, strong and sturdy knife. You can see a little bit more thickness though on the stainless steel frame lock of the Specter. So this knife does feel a little bit more substantial and a little bit more of a potentially hard use kind of knife if that was something that you needed it for. All right, and then as we continue to move back, you see on the Specter here we do have the a really classy lock bar stabilizer, just a very subtle piece right here that keeps that in check. I really like that. As we continue to go on back, you can see the pocket clips. Two position on the Gent. It is reversible. It is tip up only. Looking at the Gent's one, it sort of reminds me of Wall-E. You guys ever see that movie Wall-E? Yeah, I mean, it looks like his face. And while it's a little bit of an odd look, it's actually really strong and functional. I had some concerns about the clip just being so thin that it wouldn't be strong, but you look at the base plate for it here, and it's actually a pretty wide base plate with some pretty thick screws. So I don't have any kind of like movement or issue with the way that it carries or just the sturdiness of it. I think it's going to be just fine. So that's a good clip. The Brous Blades clip, though, is just another sleek and classy clip held on by an internal screw. So that is pretty neat. Just gives it, again, that really classy gentleman's kind of feel. This is only one position. It is not nearly as deep carrying as the Gent, but still pretty deep. Not reversible, though, on the Specter. The action on these knives, both of them are on bearings. Both of them are pretty good. But I do have to say that the Gent's action is better. It's snappier, it's really nice and crisp. I haven't had any issues with it firing, even though there is no kind of like jimping on the flipper. It's just super smooth. Locks up perfectly every time. I don't know what they do on the titanium here, but I've experienced zero lock stick, none. So titanium on the actual blade hasn't been an issue whatsoever, even though there isn't an interface. So yeah, no lock stick. I mean, this has just been excellent. See the centering right there on that one. The action on the Specter is good, and you can see it's a really nice high flipper too. So, I mean, once you break the D10, it just goes, but it just isn't as smooth, I guess, as the Gent. Still really good action, but this one, it's never going to drop shut. But it is pretty good and crisp, and I don't have any complaints about it. One of the things I forgot to talk about earlier, and let's address that right now, is the weight. Both of these knives, because of the materials, you're going to have a significant weight difference, you would think, because the thinness of the Gent and the titanium puts this at 2.39 ounces, which is just crazy light. I mean, just excellent for a gents folder. But the Brous being a little bit thicker, you would think that it'd be significantly heavier, but at 3.1 ounces, it is really still a good light knife. So not going to be too bulky, still really fits the bill for what you're looking for in just that all-purpose EDC or gent carry. You can see some of the milling on the stainless steel frame. Ergonomically, I do like the gent. I do like the fact that with the gent you have multiple configurations and the choil is functional, but it's not one of those knives where you have to use the choil. So really good there. No jimping, but again, that's just sort of, it's just sort of not that big of a thing on this knife. It doesn't really bother me all too much. I do prefer the Brous. It just feels really nice. The G10 has this really good and classy look, and it's not slick, even though it doesn't have a lot of traction. It's just, I don't know, it just seems like just right. It's almost like a Goldilocks kind of G10 for me. Just really good. It combines, like I said, that really good look without being too slick and too polished. So nicely machined, gives you just a really nice feel in the hand, and then that jimping sets it off nicely. The way that the pocket clip is, there's no hot spot whatsoever. I mean, it just fits right into the palm of the hand. So definitely impressed with that. But both of these knives are really good in hand. Let me talk about the biggest qualm, though, that I have with the gent. All right, and this is, for me, one of those things that when you think about a knife, eventually, you have these issues sometimes with knives, and they might be small no matter what it is, but if you have a small issue with one knife and no issue with another one, then you're always going to carry the other one. And the thing that really bugs me about this knife is that you can't adjust the pivot screw without taking the knife apart. The pivot is underneath this G10 overlay, and I'm going to be taking apart these knives real quickly in just a minute to show you this. But it's just a real bummer that in order to adjust the pivot, you have to take the pocket clip off and then take the scales off. Not really that big of a hassle, but it's just something that I don't want to have to deal with day in and day out. I like to be able to adjust my knives on the fly real quickly, and this is just one of those things that's like, and I really, honestly, I don't like using Loctite on pivots, and this knife will slowly develop a little bit of side to side if you don't Loctite that pivot. So, if I don't want to Loctite, I'm going to have to continually take off the scale and just adjust after every couple uses. Yeah, a little bit of a bummer there. Not really what I'm trying to do. So, actually, what we'll do right now, guys, is we'll cut over to me disassembling the knives and putting them back together, and you can get a look for how they are next to each other, and then I'll come back and do a final evaluation. All right, guys, and here we are with the two knives disassembled. On the left, you have the Specter, and then on the right, we have the Gent. And the first thing that I think about when I have these two knives apart next to each other like this is just how simple the Brous blade Specter is. Very minimalist when it comes to construction and the number of components. There are only 3 screws on this knife. 3. We've got the pivot, and then we also have this one long body screw, which goes through the butt of the knife and through the standoff. We can get that focused, maybe. And then there's one other screw, an internal screw for the pocket clip, and that is it. So taking this knife apart, maintaining it, cleaning it, very, very simple. Quality materials here, taking it apart and putting it back together, so no issue with that whatsoever. You can see on the inside just the extent of the milling on the steel frame too. So high marks for that, I'd say. Over here though with the Gent, even though there are a lot more pieces and a lot more components, it's still very easy to disassemble. And it's not bad to maintain, and the quality of the hardware is very, very high. I actually, the Torx bits that I have just lock into these screws really easily. So good quality stuff there. There are a total of 9 different screws, and it does seem a little bit high, and the reason for that is just the fact that we have the functional screws are underneath the overlays of the G10 scales. Let's see if we can get this focused. So here, if we're looking at the titanium, these 2 holes right here are for the G10. Right, and then here's where the clip goes. Beneath it, though, we actually have an internal body screw that holds the the standoff on, and it's actually still stuck in there with Loctite. So there's internal body screws, 2 of them, 1 on each side, and then here is where the stop pin is, and then the pivot. So just a lot more going on, but it really isn't all that much more complicated, so not really a negative thing. Here is the pivot for the Gent, and I just bring this to your attention because it is a Phillips head pivot. Not a big deal, not a bad thing, just interesting. You know, but I think the frustration is just that you have to take the knife apart, you know, at least start disassembling it in order to tighten that up. And I think a little Loctite would fix that up. If you don't like to use that stuff, though, the way I don't, maybe a little bit of a detractor. But I think that for a lot of people, and depending on just how I feel on this particular day, myself included, for a lot of people, all of this extra stuff versus the Specter is going to be worth it just because the action's better, and just a lot of the other aspects of the knife make it worth that compromise, if you even consider it a compromise. All right, guys, so we'll get these back together and then finish up the video. And actually, guys, one more thing I wanted to show you real quick about this Massdrop Gent. You can see I still have the outer screws and the clip that needs to go back on. But here we are with the titanium frame, and this knife locks up. It is perfectly functional. So certainly, as a number of people have said, specifically Slicey Dicey in his comparison review, this is a titanium frame lock at its core. All right, it's not a liner lock. This is a frame lock knife. It is perfectly usable and functional, just like this. And honestly, if there weren't all these holes in the titanium, I might have half a mind just to keep it this way, you know, and screw the pocket clip right into this. But as it is, I'll stick with the G10 for now. But yeah, the titanium on here is good. It makes it even thinner, even more sleek. But you do not need those G10 scales, so yeah, I'd be surprised if Massdrop doesn't eventually just make a version of this that's just the titanium. But anyway, one more look at that real quick, guys, and yep, we'll get back to putting the knife together and wrapping this video up. All right, so here we are, and time to wrap it up. And we have pros and cons about both of these knives, although for both of them, the pros are very significant. And what I will say is that the pros for the Gent more than outweigh the cons. The fact that you can get S35VN, you can get a titanium frame lock knife, essentially, with really nice G10 scales and a number of colors for $85. I mean, there's no way around saying that this is a huge steal. You know, and the funny thing is, when I first unboxed this knife and got it next to the Brous, the first thing I thought was, man, the Brous is in trouble. Because who would want to pay for this knife when you could get this one for half the price? You know, even if it is a long wait until these come back out, and it probably won't be. They'll probably be back out in the next couple months. But why would you go with the Specter? Honestly, guys, having these two knives in the hand, like I said, I prefer the Specter, but at double the price, I can't really recommend it. You know, I ended up getting this one used, like lightly used, at a good deal. I didn't pay the full price. I paid $100 for it. And so for an extra $20 versus the Gent, if you have that kind of preference, it definitely makes sense. But, you know, at almost double the price, it's really hard for me to make that recommendation. So let me know, guys, compared one to another, what do you prefer? I'm going to guess most of you are going to say the Gent, but even if we're not doing the comparison, just looking at the two knives, what do you think about them? Any questions, comments, complaints, suggestions, as always, let me know. I'll be talking with you soon, and I appreciate your time. Have a good one.